Hello, everyone. My name is Tim. Welcome to All Out Coach, your personal podcast that will add energy, excitement, and character to your day, to your business, and to your life. It's my mission to inspire you to stretch yourselves and lift others. Today, I have a special guest who is a leader, a guru in the pharmaceutical industry, a CEO of Delta Point, consultant across different industries, different disciplines, sales, marketing, medical affairs. He's also a former athlete. I've known him for 15 years, and he has one unique ability to leave everyone energized and inspired about the future. Given where our present is today, I thought that he was the perfect guest to talk about the future. And his name is Jerry Acuff. He will talk about how to stay personal and energetic in our impersonal and virtual reality. What a pleasure to have you here, Jerry.
Thanks, Tim. Welcome. I appreciate being on. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. You too, absolutely. I want to get to know Jerry the person before we get to know about Jerry the consultant and the personal coach. So I'd like to ask you first about what were some of the pivotal moments in your career that led you to become a coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, and I guess I'll get as personal as I need to be. When I was in the seventh grade, I was smoking and drinking. I'd been arrested for shoplifting. And I walk into Sherwood Junior High in Memphis, Tennessee, the first day of seventh grade, and this big, tall guy, bald guy, looks at me and said, "Boy, you need to be playing football. And I expect you to play football this afternoon at 3:30. This is the first day of school, and I was scared to death. I called my mother and told her to buy me some cleats. She bought me high tops. I was the only person who wore high tops. And I started playing football. And that guy, his name was Bud Garrett, had a gigantic impact on my life because, you know, I became a very successful athlete in high school, made first team All-State in Florida in football, got a college football scholarship to the Virginia Military Institute. And that really shaped my life in a million different ways. You know, one is my first job in pharma, I actually got because my roommate from college introduced me to somebody that worked in the pharma business. And in spite of the fact that I wore a brown polyester suit to the interview, the guy hired me. Now, I wound up being his boss, you know, one day when I was VP GM of the company. And I asked him, "Why in the heck did you hire me? I'd have never hired me." And he said, "I hired you because you went to VMI. And if you went to VMI, which is a military school," he said, "and if you can put up with the rigor and the discipline of that, and I figured you were pretty articulate, and you certainly look like a hard worker from your background, I figured you'd be successful." So much of my life has been shaped by where I went to college. You know, I've been married twice. I have a child by my first marriage who's 44 and doing great, very, very successful in the software business. And then I've got a 20-year-old junior at VMI where I went to school. And my wife and I, second wife and I, have been married 20 years. And she's been hugely pivotal in my success because when I got fired from a job in 2001, I was VP of sales for a training company. And the guy that was my boss was, I thought, a friend of mine. And then I got in a disagreement with him and he fired me because I disagreed with him. And I was 51 years old. I had enough money to last me 4 months and I had a 1-year-old. And so I used my network, which has been hugely important to me. And I wound up getting my first gig at AstraZeneca and started this consulting company, which was 19 years ago. And it was just my wife and I. And I would do, you know, she'd write the proposals, she'd create the presentations, and I would go and do the work. And of course, now, you know, we have, I think, 15 employees. We've done business with 17 of the top 100 companies in the world. I wound up as the vice president and general manager of that pharmaceutical company, you know, just starting from a rep with a degree in English, which I guess qualifies you to run a drug company. And then, you know, started this business, and we've been in business 19 years. Then done business with 17 of the top 100 companies in the world. I've written 4 best-selling books, 3 of them on relationship building and 1 on sales excellence. And, I've been to the White House to talk about healthcare reform. I mean, I've lived a very blessed life, but all of it related to the fact that, I was an athlete who got an education which my parents could not afford. And then the network that ultimately came out of that spawned me getting not only the job in pharma, but getting my first job as a consultant. Now, the other thing that's interesting about my consulting career, I can trace. We've probably done $90 million in consulting in the last 19 years. If I had to, just add them all up, I can trace 70% of that to 2 people.
2 relationships.
Yes. Wow. But you see, what happens is they've introduced me to somebody else who's introduced me to somebody else who's introduced. So if I did like a genealogy tree,
right,
it's amazing how much impact these 2 people had. One of them used to work for me, and he was in my sales operations group. And the other one, actually, I hired as a rep who wound up as the president of AstraZeneca in China. And he was the first person to hire me, when I started the business. So my life has been charmed by the fact that I understood at a very early age that relationships mattered and that you should treat everybody like they're important because they are. That's why all this social injustice bothers me a lot, because, the truth is we've got, multiple camps of people who are far too intolerant, far too closed-minded. And my belief is you treat everybody like they're important because they are, and it doesn't matter I don't care what they believe. I don't care what they do, as long as they're not, a violent criminal. Yeah. I'm going to treat them like they're the president of the company. Yeah. So that's basically me. I've got, like I said, 2 children. I got a wife that's, been my rock. I mean, when I first started this business, this is a funny story. Now, my wife is, she's very healthy oriented, and she's very frugal, but not ridiculously cheap. She just, wise with money, which is one of the reasons why she's our chief financial officer. Yep. But when I did my very first project, I think I charged the client $75,000. The next project came in, was identical. She said, "Why are you charging $75,000?" And so I gave her my reasoning. She said, "Why don't you charge 90?" I said, "They're not going to pay 90. She said, "Well, if they don't, then you can go back to 75. And so I did 90, and nobody said anything. And then the next one came in. She said, "Let's try 120. And then the next one came in. She said, "Let's do 150. And 150 is where we ended up. Now, none of that I'd have had enough sense to do. Right. So my wife has been, critical in my business, and has been a huge asset, to me. And she's great at giving advice, and she likes to do that. But, she's been a huge part of my success. But I will tell you, I tell people all the time, my company is successful because of the people that work there, not because of me. I mean, I got the thing started, but when you bring on people in your company, which I have, and you treat them like family and you love them, and then they fall in love with you and what you're doing. They believe in what you're doing. And by the way, I would say 90% of our employees were former clients. So they know what we do, and they like what we do, and they want to do what we do. But when you bring people like that, they just made my company so much better. And, I'm smart enough to know that I have my limits. I have a president of the company, a guy named Matt Murphy. Mm-hmm. And when I decided to step down as president 2 years ago, Matt was the easy choice. And my wife said, "Well, why'd you choose Matt?" And I said, "I'll tell you why." I said, "I've had 100 arguments with Matt, and I've lost 99 times." Now, that tells me he's the person I want running my company. I want somebody who does not think like me. Yeah. And it's been a gigantic blessing to me. So that's sort of me personally, and me. Now, my wife and I are both philanthropic. We donate a scholarship. We donate a scholarship to our college. She donates money to her college. She's very involved in the church. She's on the parish council. And we believe that, that giving doesn't cost, it pays. And so I believe that, one of the one of the universal truths is when you give, you get.
Yeah.
And so we're big believers in giving.
I follow coaches, but you are a coach who lives, who walks the talk, who is
Right.
genuine, who I think stretches others, but also recognizes others as well, and who I think personifies how other people also sometimes push us to stretch ourselves as well. Just like those examples you just talked about, your wife and your colleagues, your CEO.
But the other thing that happened to me when I got hired into the pharmaceutical business, the first 14 years I was in, and I worked for the same company for 20 years. I only worked for one company. But the first 14 years that I was in, before I went to the home office, the first 14 years I had 3 supervisors, and all 3 of them were the best coaches in the world. Now, what was fascinating about all 3 of them is one of them, who was the middle boss I had, he actually had trained the other 2. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody asked me who's the greatest leader you ever worked for, while the last one I worked for had the biggest impact on my life, I would say Gene Vesna, mm-hmm. who was my regional manager when I was a rep, and then when I became a DM, he was also my boss. He taught those other 2 how to be great leaders. And if it weren't for Gene, then Don wouldn't have been as great as he were. Jim wouldn't have been as great as he were. And I can tell you that so much of what I have, espoused, learned, done, it emanates from the powerful presence of these 3 people who really cared about you as a human being.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the people I work with and the people that I've worked for.
Yeah. They were not just your manager, but they were also your coach and your mentor, right? Who developed not your just technical skills, but those non-technical kind of life skills. And
yeah, they gave you room to hang yourself because they wanted you to learn. I mean, I'll never forget the first person I hired when I was a manager. My boss told me not to hire him. And he said, why? And I said, why? He said, because he flunked the test. You got to pass this test. And we've never hired anybody who's flunked the test. I said, the test is wrong. He said, how many people have you hired? I said, no. He said, well, and you want to go against the grain? I said, I do, Gene, and I'm vehement about this. So he said, okay, you hire the guy then. And I mean, that takes a guy with a lot of confidence in you.
Yeah. Now,
2 years later, that guy was the number 1 rep in the country. And he's been one of my closest friends since 1981. Yeah. And it's probably the best pharmaceutical person I ever met in my life. But my boss told me not to hire him, but then let me hire him.
Right.
And the same thing with the second one. The second one I hired after he'd been with me for 6 weeks, my same boss told me, I think you got to fire this guy. And I said, why? And he said, well, he's having trouble with the language. I mean, he can't say pseudomonas. I said, hell, I can teach him pseudomonas. I said, let me tell you what I can't teach him. I can't teach him to work 100 hours a week, which is what this guy does. And if I believe in effort, which I do, I bet this guy's going to be wildly successful. 2 years later, he's number 1 in the country.
Yeah.
So, but my point is the lessons that Gene taught me were believe in your people, give them a chance to make their own mistakes, and try not to influence them if you have confidence in them. And, we hired in our company, we hired a senior level person. And when my, VPs came to me and said, do you want to interview her? And I said, no, if y'all like her, she's fine by me. And I never interviewed her. And this is a senior level executive committee, person. But I said, look, if y'all like her, it'd be stupid for me to interview her. I mean, if you like her, she got to be good. And so, and I will tell you, she's been phenomenal. So I learned that from those three bosses. I learned that those are the kinds of decisions you make. You hire people that are really good and you allow them to use their brain. Yeah. And if you don't allow them to use their brain, you're going to make a huge mistake.
Yeah. It sounds like
you've got the only brain, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Mine's really small.
Yeah. It sounds like you've had incredible mentors and you've been an incredible mentor to many others, and they're fortunate, including myself, by the way, Jerry.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, as your mentee, even as I am a coach as well to others. So,
Well, I have my own coaches. I mean, one of them's a 45-year-old ex-CIA agent. And one of them is the president of my company. I mean, I call him and ask him, what do you think we should do? What do you think I should do? How should I handle this? I see him he says, even though he's, technically I'm his boss, I see him as my partner and my coach. I think everybody needs a coach, everybody. And I think for everybody in life who wants to be successful, they can find somebody that'll help them. But you got to ask them, because they're not going to say, I bet Tim wants a coach. The only way you're ever going to find a coach is to ask somebody. And if you ask somebody and they don't do it, then you learn they're probably a jerk, which means you didn't really want them anyway. Or they'll say yes and they'll help you.
Yeah.
If you want to get, you got to ask.